Sharing an apartment with friends is often difficult, especially if they begin helping themselves to your belongings. However, as Agnes and Leroy and Helwig Samuelson found out, if your roommates should decide that you are stealing their boyfriends, then the payback can be horrifying. When Winnie Ruth Jude, Agnes Ann Leroy, and Helwig Samuelson, 3 unmarried girls, decided to share an apartment in Phoenix, Arizona in 1931, everything went well at first. Like many young women living with friends, they enjoyed each other's company, borrowed clothes, and swapped gossip. Sadly, the easy-going-on atmosphere wasn't to last. Winnie was somewhat promiscuous, and brought a stream of men back to the apartment. Agnes and Helwig objected. The 3 women had fierce arguments, and Winnie began to believe that her friends were putting obstacles in her way because they wanted her boyfriends for themselves. As her rage and jealousy mounted, she became more and more convinced that Agnes and Helwig were sleeping with the men that rightfully belonged to her. On October the 16th, 1931, she snapped and furiously demanded why the pair kept ruining her relationships. In the circumstances, her roommates did the worst thing they possibly could have. They laughed at Winnie. She then shot them both dead. Working with remarkable presence of mind for a young woman who had just committed a double murder, Winnie immediately put a bullet through her own hand in order to be able to claim self-defense should she be caught. Then she set about disposing of the bodies. Her plan was to dump them into the ocean in her home state of California, and she packed the corpses of her friends into a large trunk for transport, then booked a ticket on a train. When a porter came to collect it, he complained it was too heavy and demanded that she instead put the medical books, as she described the contents, into smaller cases. Winnie solved the problem by sawing the bodies into pieces and packing them into smaller boxes. Incredibly, the cases got as far as California without incident and remained at the station while Winnie fetched her brother to help her with them, telling him brazenly, "There are 2 bodies in these trunks, and the less you know about it, the better off you are." Winnie's plan now began to unravel. A baggage clerk smelled the distinctive odor of rotting flesh coming from the cases and suspected Winnie and her brother of being meat smugglers. It was not uncommon for meat to be smuggled across states of any place. He asked them to open the cases, but Winnie told them she didn't have the keys. Fearing that she was moments from discovery, she grabbed her brother's arm and walked away briskly. As the pair drove away, the clerk made a note of the car registration plate. Then he called the police, still thinking that the worst crime that had been committed was the transport of contraband meat. His mistake was soon corrected in the most horrific manner imaginable. Detectives broke into the cases to find the putrid, rotting corpses of 2 young women. The hunt was on for a murderer, and Winnie couldn't keep ahead of the law for long. The police traced her brother's car, and meanwhile, the wound in Winnie's hand had become infected. She was forced to attend a hospital, and, her cover blown, was arrested. In court, Winnie maintained her painfully concocted story of self-defense, telling the jury that Helwig had shot her first and that she had then wrestled the gun away from her assailtant. The fact that Winnie was now armed hadn't deterred her roommates, and Agnes and Helwig both attacked her again. In fear for her life, Winnie had shot them both. No one believed her. Winnie Jude was found guilty of the murders of Agnes Ann Leroy and Helwig Samuelson and sentenced to death. But still she tried to evade justice. While in prison awaiting execution, Winnie's behavior convinced doctors that she was actually insane and not responsible for her crimes. At a mental hearing, she put on a fine performance, pretending to hear voices, mumbling incoherently, and pulling out her hair and clothes. The death sentence was commuted to a life of imprisonment in the Arizona State Mental Institution. Winnie proved sane enough to manage to escape from the secure hospital several times, at one time staying on the run for 7 years, during which time she worked as a housekeeper. Winnie was finally released on December the 22nd, 1971, 40 years after a deadly fit of jealousy.